Hello, hello, hello. Let me get this all started quick. Okay, why isn't chat popping up on screen? Testing. Oh, there you go. What, is it too low or something? Okay, it's working now. So anyway, Tim Pool and Ben Shapiro decided to do one of Ben Shapiro's Sunday special shows or whatever. And I just saw this. I hope I don't get a copyright strike or something. But I mean, might as well just start it, I guess. This is going to be painful. Really painful, but it's worth it. This is like a scientific study. It's not always going to be fun, but we're going to learn amazing things as a result.
Everyone I've talked to who said they used to be a liberal, who then became conservative, voted for Trump, or are just, no longer part of the woke cult or whatever.
Wait, is he doing this remotely? I thought the big deal with Hassan and Sam Cedar, they wanted to do it remotely when he was inviting lefties on his show, but he said, no, I don't do that.
It was because they started doing their own research. They started reading the quotes. They started watching the videos. And
Reading
so
the quotes and watching the videos?
Create
What?
incentives for people to create, to push cancel culture and exacerbate the problem. It also creates the opportunity.
Buzzwords.
The
Mr.
political bias of
Buzzwords.
legacy media becomes more and more obvious every day as they seek to deceive the American people. In response, the public has begun to turn to members of replacement media, those who bring with them
Joe
the truth
Rogan.
without a covert agenda.
Those who bring with them the truth without a covert agenda. They show Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin. Amazing.
One of the most popular voices to arise from this movement is our guest today, journalist, commentator, and YouTuber
And
Tim Pool. Tim
Wow.
first came into the public view with his on-the-ground journalism, live streaming the Occupy movements of 2011.
Whatever was happening seemed to be important, it seemed to be interesting, and a lot of people were talking about it.
A few years later, he would join Vice Media, field reporting from conflict areas around the world. His work has found new traction recently, however, now that the conflicts have come to the home front. Tim has spent
conflicts
the
have
last
come
few
to the
years
home
largely
front.
focused on the rise of the Antifa movement, or perhaps more so on the media's complete lack of attention to the violent and fascist tactics that
No, I'm not saying they have an agenda. I'm just saying to say those are the truth tellers of the internet where people can get their 100% true and woke info from is really funny. Dave Rubin, mainly Dave Rubin, because Joe Rogan's just a guy who does a talk show.
Movement
But Dave
importance.
Rubin is,
Tim
we
has
all
been on the
know,
front lines
that's
of
the most
exposing the
laughable
radical
one.
left and the lying media. A former Bernie Sanders supporter, Tim raised eyebrows this year with his emphatic support for Donald Trump.
Former Bernie
While not
Sanders
condoning all
supporter.
of the president's actions, he saw Trump as a vital bulwark for the country.
While not condoning all of the president's actions, Tim Pool literally makes an excuse for everything Donald Trump does.
He dives in on this choice in our conversation. Tim and I also discuss the propaganda war raging across the country as we wait for the results of the election, including the latest offenses from legacy media and big tech.
Oh
what the
God,
future may
how
hold.
dare Twitter censor blatant disinformation? And they don't even censor the disinformation. They put a disclaimer on it or whatever. They say this is not, or this information is disputed. It's not like they delete the tweets when Donald Trump lies about something.
For the country
They keep
under
it
a
up.
new administration.
All right, I think they do they're doing advertisements here. Let's just fast forward.
Number one, VPN rated by
Go buy
Wired,
Ben
CNET,
Shapiro's
Verge,
VPN.
and countless others. Everybody needs to protect themselves. I've been using ExpressVPN for years. Go check them out right now at expressvpn.com/Ben. Again, that is expressvpn.com/Ben. EXPRESSVPN.com/Ben.
It's almost over.
Tim Pool, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I know this has been long awaited on the interwebs, this final confrontation. So let's talk about what's going on in the world right now. Obviously, aside from the fact that everybody is still locked in their basement because of COVID, which we'll get to, we're still in the middle of an election. This has been declared over by the media. The media have said that this thing is over. Not only have they declared that Joe Biden is the president-elect, they have declared that anybody who refuses to call him the president-elect, even though he's not actually yet the president-elect,
Oh, the
he's
votes.
engaged in some sort of coup. What do you make of all of this?
I mean, it's kind of a tradition that the media would say, hey, here's the winner. It's projected, and they just go along with it. But I think it's kind of a millennial bias. We're so used to seeing these elections, aside from Bush v. Gore, where the results are kind of clear. Mitt Romney didn't get nearly enough votes, so he just says, okay, I concede. But this is a really, really close race. I mean, we're within recount of numbers for certain states. Georgia just announced a hand recount. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't really make sense to say.
The race with Hillary she lost by the same margin in these states that Donald Trump is losing by. And by the way, the coup part isn't not saying Joe Biden is going to be the next president because he's not certified. The coup part is saying we should be throwing out all of these ballots. We should be throwing out 100,000, 200,000, 1 million ballots. That's the coup part. The disinformation, the total disregard for democracy. We aren't saying, I mean, if you don't want to call Joe Biden the president yet, now that's not a coup.
Joe Biden won
No one,
when there's
like,
a legal
they're not even
process,
saying that.
happening.
Hey, what's
Several
up, Matt?
states are too close to call still. The media has just decided this is it. Joe Biden won. It's over. Meanwhile, I think they're starting to
The
wake.
vote count decided it's over. No legal rulings in American history have made up deficits this big. Maybe in Georgia, Donald Trump can eke out a win, but his deficit in the Electoral College is so big, he'd have to overturn PA, Georgia.
Up to the fact that Trump has, I think he actually has a legal path to victory. There was an article put out by Vox recently showing all the ways that Trump is still planning on taking this to court, maybe disqualifying certain votes, maybe getting a victory through the Electoral College by having Republicans at the state level certify their own electors.
Oh.
So Trump's certainly not out of this.
You hear that? So his routes to win are to delegitimize votes, to get them thrown out, and also a way to bypass the entire electoral system by using state houses to untie electors from their state's results so they can vote in accordance with whoever they want. So like if your state house is Republican, they could say, hey, our electors are now going to vote for Trump, even though Trump lost this state.
And I got to tell you, it's kind of weird seeing these two different realities where you have one media apparatus saying President-elect Joe Biden announces his COVID plans. Then you see another one saying Donald Trump is in court right now challenging, the results in certain states or impropriety at a certain level. So it's almost like they're trying to tell us Joe Biden won to convince us because it's not over. The certification hasn't happened for the states yet, let alone for the election as a whole and then choosing the electors.
By the way, Trump's lawyers are quitting in different states because they know there's no way forward.
The level of hysteria to me is the thing that really stands out. And it seems to me that the media are basically addicts, that Donald Trump is their cocaine and they can't let go of it. And so they require just this constant addiction, that they require a constant supply of chaos. I also think there's something else going on here too, which is they keep saying that Trump is about to participate in a coup, that let's say the electors vote for Joe Biden, he's going to hole up in the Oval Office like Al Pacino at the end of Scarface. He's going to be doing blow and firing guns through the door and while shouting, say hello to my little friend. And I think this has much more to do with the media's pathological need to paint Trump as Hitler so they can do whatever they want than it does with reality.
To do whatever they want. What does he mean? Like, what's their agenda? Enough with the, the hyperbolic statements and the generalities.
I think so.
Say something.
I will say, when I think it was Michael Moore who
Not
said it
just
a while ago,
buzzwords.
Trump's not going to leave even if he loses. And I was like, get out of here. That's ridiculous. I mean, I think right now what's happening is they're putting forth this media narrative, the election's over, so they can now be like, see, look, he's not leaving even though the election's over when it's not.
He's still saying
But
the results
I will
are
say,
fake.
Trump's taken some actions. It appears that he's not planning on leaving. This could just be because he's going through the legal process, and until all of his legal...
Literally every other sentence is a contradictory one. They're literally, they can't, they're not even staying on one astral plane. They have no
tactics
idea what
have
they're
played
saying.
out.
They're just saying bullshit and
operate as
buzzwords.
though he's going to get elected. But I do think at this point, the idea that there's, like you mentioned, Trump's going to be locked in the Oval Office, the Secret Service is going to kick the door in, is just ridiculous. But at this point, I got to be honest, I'm ready to believe anything. Just the amount of absurdity we've seen throughout 2020. We're in a global pandemic. They're starting to lock down different states now. So maybe it really is just going to be the craziest election we've ever seen in our lives. But I don't know. I feel like life is more boring than that. So.
What?
Yeah, I do too. I mean,
What
I
does
think
that
that one of the
mean?
things that we find out
I
the
feel
more
like
we're
life
into the
is more
political
boring
sphere
than
is that politics is a lot less like House of Cards and a lot more like Veep. That there's this assumption on the part of people who are outside the world of politics that people know what they're doing, that there are these very sophisticated plans, and that people have thought 3 steps down the road and they're all playing 4D chess. And it turns out that just like in every other industry, when you hit the top of the industry, you realize that everybody's an idiot just like you. And that is pretty much I think
that's
how it
pretty
works in
true.
politics.
Yeah, especially I think when I was younger, I was talking about this recently. I used to look up to all these adults. They must be so good at what they do. They must be the best of the best. And man, when I'm older, now I'm, in my mid 30s and I'm like, everyone's as dumb as they've always been. It's just, people doing people stuff. You think that you walk into this election center
is
and you're going to see a whole
peak
bunch of
intellectual
experts with their
conversation.
badges and they're wearing gloves and everything's perfect. No, you got some regular guy who's volunteering and he's confused. You get sworn affidavits from some people because they don't know what's going on, and it's just humans. It's not like a well-oiled machine necessarily. It's not like a computer. It's a bunch of people with different
they're just saying
perspectives and different
words.
understandings and different skills trying to work together. So I think for the most part, though, when you put enough people together, you get some really amazing stuff. But you'll see errors, you'll see impropriety and stuff. And so I think, especially now with the election, one of the biggest mistakes the media is making, which I think could actually lead to serious chaos, maybe conflict, is that recognizing
Civil
humans
War
are
Tim
imperfect,
Pool.
you're going to find a bunch of people saying in a sworn affidavit, I saw this thing happen. You can't just ignore that and say, we will do nothing. You have to let people know.
What if every affidavit is retracted and then put back up and then retracted again and put back up and retracted again, and then you find out that people were paid behind the scenes to sign it?
In our power to clean up any potential errors, so they view this election as legitimate.
No, they don't care about errors.
If Joe Biden really does get certified as the winner, he gets inaugurated, but they don't look into this stuff, it would undermine his presidency. Because you've got 72.2 million people now who have voted for Donald Trump. I think everybody deserves to look at these affidavits or these whistleblowers and just say, is it going to change the election? Maybe it won't, but we should investigate. And I will also add too, I think, Donald Trump's legal path to victory right now, it's almost like he's dangling fraud over on to his left. And you got all the media saying there's no evidence of fraud. You got the activists saying fraud, but Trump's lawsuits are about impropriety. His lawsuits, in Pennsylvania at least, is about the equal protection clause under the 14th Amendment. That has nothing to do with fraud. It has everything to do with they didn't count ballots properly, or they created an alternate track of ballots, or they violated a court order. So while you've got these people over here dancing around screaming fraud, Trump is actually taking a legal battle over whether or not he can disqualify hundreds of thousands of votes due to...
Trump got not hundreds of thousands. He got a couple hundred votes thrown out on different technicalities. But there's this meme of, there's like a really powerful Trump and a really weak Trump. The really powerful Trump is talking about fraud on Twitter, and the really weak Trump is in the courtroom actually having to bring up evidence, and all the Trump lawyers are sitting there like poor little puppies because they don't know what the hell to do because there's no actual evidence.
Failure to uphold election standards.
I think there's also something else going on here too, which is that because we always live in the stupidest possible timeline, and so we break down into these binary positions, the positions have now become on the right. Voter fraud is widespread. It is in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of votes. And on the left, there's no such thing as voter fraud. I've never heard of this voter fraud thing you're talking about. Voter irregularities don't exist in the slightest. And it's amazing how those positions completely reversed from about a month ago. When a month ago, all we were hearing from Democrats is that Donald Trump was personally going around and burning mailboxes in order to prevent people from depositing their votes because he was that committed to voter
There was a systemic effort to make sure people could not hand in enough mail-in ballots, and also in states like Texas, they made sure there was a lack of drop-off ballots. In big counties, they limited each county in Texas to one ballot box. Like, these are systemic things that were happening. It's much different from the conspiratorial stuff that the right is saying. Like, holy
Louis
crap.
DeJoy screwing with the machines so that the votes wouldn't be properly delivered or counted. He was defunding the post office. And now everybody
Simple
who was saying
voter
1 month
suppression.
ago that the election was going to be totally screwed up is now saying, look what an amazingly clean, unbelievably awesome election we
No,
had.
the issue was collecting mail-in ballots and making sure they actually got in and preventing voter suppression. It had nothing to do with election integrity. These are 2 points that do not comply whatsoever. He's not making any points right now, and they're so smug. They're always so smug. They're like, oh, I'm so smart. And people listen to these guys and think, wow, they're intellectual.
And everybody a month ago was going, you know what, the election's probably going to be okay. They're all like, God, that was just the worst, most fraudulent election I've ever seen in my life.
That's not...
What's crazy is,
oh my God,
when we did the primaries where we had these mass mail-in voting, we had a massive amount of rejected ballots. I think the Washington Post had like 500,000. Where are all of those right now? That's what I was wondering. Shouldn't we be getting these same reports we got from the Democratic primary? We're not getting those. So I think you got human error. You're going to get some level of failure, but I think you hit the nail on the head. There's this weird tribalist polarization that we see, and it's happened in other places in the world when you get people. I don't want to get too specific because I don't want to call any specific regions out, but there are some instances where you're like, how does that one group believe the exact opposite of the other group when neither position makes the most sense? So I think a better real world example is when COVID first hit the U.S.
Here we
I knew a
go.
bunch of conservatives
Here we
saying,
go.
"Get your masks. Like you got to wear your masks." But we were seeing, Fauci and I think the Surgeon General saying, "No, no, no, don't get masks." Then it completely flipped. Now you see videos
Does anybody remember when COVID first started? A bunch of conservatives rushing to the store saying we need our masks. Does anybody remember that happening? Because I sure as hell don't. I don't remember any point in history where conservatives were like, we need masks, and then Fauci's like, no, conservatives don't get it. I know Fauci did the thing on I forget what TV show it was, but he said that normal people shouldn't be wearing masks. One, because the science isn't fully developed at that point, but also because there's a wide shortage, and we needed to make sure medical professionals could get the masks.
of, it's Trump supporters saying, "I'm not going to wear a mask. I shouldn't have to." And you've got people on the left saying everyone should wear a mask. It seems like for tribal reasons, somehow it flipped. Just whatever you say, I'll do the opposite of.
So you're really, I want to reverse course here and kind of provide some background on you for people who may not have heard your show or seen your YouTube videos. So you're a really heterodox thinker. You don't really fit into any box. People will call you on the left. People will call you progressive.
He
People will call
doesn't
you
fit
right wing.
into a
It all
box.
depends on who's doing the characterization. So why don't we talk first about sort of how you came to do what you're doing right now, and then we'll talk about how your political
This is the
views
fun topic.
were formed over time, because
This
they
is
do
the
seem
fun part.
to move and evolve over time in a way that's really unique in the space. So first, I think that to talk about kind of how you came to prominence in this space in the first place. My first experience seeing some of your stuff was during the Occupy Wall Street protests, when you were the only person who was out there actually taking footage and covering that stuff. But how did you get started in this area?
Well, it started with Occupy Wall Street. So I had been doing nonprofit
This is
work.
interesting.
I had, I've been hanging out with hackers, and this was back in like the days of Anonymous
Hackers.
and some other hacker groups. And so the big core ideology behind
Pool
what
is
we did and why
anonymous.
we did it, and it was mostly other people, I wasn't super active, was making sure people had access to information, be it get them the internet or give them the key details as to what's going on. And then all of a sudden you had these journalists say, well, that's journalism. You're sharing information. You're disseminating that stuff. So for me, I ended up on the East Coast. And then when I saw Occupy Wall Street happened, I was just I had just left California.
Tim Pool
I'm
gets a
just
lot of
some
money.
guy who's skateboarding and making videos, and I decided to go and start filming, eventually start live streaming. And while I'm streaming, I'm giving my thoughts on what's happening and essentially doing this raw live commentary. I had this big moment where I did a live stream for 22 hours straight. People were like running up to find me to give me batteries to keep it going. And then I started just covering conflict and crisis. From there, I went from some guy who's live streaming these protests to actually working for Vice. And I was the founding member of Vice News, the actual vertical, where I went on the ground to various countries, like Venezuela, like Turkey, Brazil, went to Egypt, watched the revolution happen. And I was just covering the conflict and crisis stuff there. Eventually, the conflict and crisis came to the U.S.
Maybe he just has like PTSD or something. By the way, this is very common actually. Like random people who want to go live stream these crazy events, companies will hire you because they don't have a lot of reporters who will get that deep. Tim Pool going and live streaming a riot for 22 hours or whatever he just said, like that's a big deal for some companies like Vox. That like a Vox, not Fox. I don't know if that came out clearly enough, but
So I ended up working for a company called Fusion. They started out trying to be.
They both
like
get paid by
Vice,
the
and
Koch brothers,
This was
you
at
know?
a time, it's 2014, when these companies all started getting super woke. I've never been particularly interested in the weird cultural far left stuff. Even though I saw it at Occupy Wall Street, I was like, I think that's kind of ridiculous. So I ended up working with this company, but within 7 or 8 months, they got a new editor in chief. All of a sudden, everything they're doing is woke. So they essentially put me in, what we call golden handcuffs. I was paid really well to work for this, Disney company, but they didn't want to use real, like on the ground conflict reporting because they wanted to do video segments about,
The same
woke stuff,
copium
I guess.
suppliers. Yeah.
But ultimately, my contract ended. I started doing my own YouTube channel, and I started by actually traveling around. So I went to Sweden. I did a 2-week daily vlog from Sweden, interviewing people, seeing what was going on.
How does a guy go to Egypt, Turkey, see a revolution happen, travel the whole globe, go to Sweden, interview people there, become really popular in media in America? How do you do all these things and still not have any clue about what you're talking about?
When Donald Trump did that, there was that famous moment where he said, "Last night in Sweden, you see what happened," and the media went nuts. That was a crazy moment for me because all of a sudden I had my colleagues from Vice who used to help me go to these countries messaging me saying, "Don't go to Sweden to cover this story." And I was confused. Why wouldn't I? Like, I went to Egypt, I went to Ukraine, I went to a bunch of countries. No, but don't do this one. Trump's lying. And I'm like, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about Trump or what he's talking about. I just heard there are some claims about, refugees and crime. I'm going to go and investigate it. And they got really, really mad at me. And that was when I could see like this weird split starting to emerge.
Okay, so Sweden is a really homogenous society, and they did have a issue with like refugees and integration. And I guess Tim Pool is saying that Vox didn't want him to go there because they got too woke. And yeah, that is a catch-all term for whatever. But they didn't want him to go there because they're too woke, and they did not want him to see the refugee issues or whatever, the integration
so from there,
issues.
I come back to the U.S. and I started covering the conflicts we see on the ground in the U.S., Proud Boys, Antifa, that kind of stuff. And of course, what do I see? 99% of the time, you get some Trump supporters waving little American flags, and Antifa shows up and attacks them.
Yeah, okay.
I would report it.
Shit, dude.
Antifa would get really mad at me.
Exactly how it happens.
So they started threatening me.
Antifa got mad at
me.
him.
Someone posted a photo of my mom at one point.
Antifa got mad at him. The organization Antifa, the leader of Antifa, who is designated to be from like Fresno or something. The leader
and so
of Antifa,
that was like,
wherever they are.
I think I already had some, personal biases going back to my upbringing in Chicago, but now it's all I'm trying to do is cover what's happening on the ground. And by telling the truth, these extremists and like Antifa type people were attacking me and threatening me. And that, was kind of, I guess, to be expected. But it did set me off on a path where, for one, I couldn't actually go on the ground anymore. So I slowly stopped doing it because it was getting more and more dangerous. So then I started doing more and more news commentary and analysis to kind of make up for the fact that I couldn't be on the ground, aggregate more of the people who actually are doing the work.
So he was on the ground in a country like Turkey, but being somewhere in the United States, Antifa posed a greater threat than being in I don't believe that.
And I kind of feel like it's not a completely uncommon track for journalists to go from field reporter and then eventually later in their career, they find themselves as like a news commentary kind of person. And then once it just became completely obvious that, it happened when I went to Portland. I had some guy chasing me around, yelling like while I'm trying to film. And I'm like, okay, clearly I got, too many people know who I am. They're seeking me out. They're causing trouble. They're trolling, or they're actually attacking me.
The fame
so
part
I'm
might
have
play
to stop
into
coming
it.
to a lot of these events and then just report to the best of my abilities from the desk. I just started increasing the amount of work I started doing. I started doing multiple segments per day. Now I think I do an hour and 45 minutes of direct commentary, and I do a total of like, I do an additional 2 hours of a live podcast show, which brings me to this position where now I'm kind of this, I think, as you mentioned, like a heterodox individual, don't really fit necessarily anywhere. Although I think I've been classified as like cultural right wing, whatever that means. But my political positions are kind of just like where Democrats used to be.
Whatever
it's a
that
weird
means.
position to be in. I will say, I think
this is where Democrats used to be, by the way. This is where they used to be. Yep. Basically. Yep. Totally, Tim.
The easiest way to explain that I'm not orthodox, I suppose, in some capacity, like I'm a heterodox personality, is whenever
Tim Pool is saying he's not like the other girls.
they try and smear people who are, like right now, you got a lot of people on podcasts and YouTube, for instance, that are saying the election's not over. You get these articles saying, or CNN, for instance, you've got the right-wing media lying, claiming the election's not over, but they never mention me. Because if they do, they show you like, my segments are actually fairly, I don't know. I don't want to say bland, but the joke is that I'm a milquetoast fence sitter. I will tell you, we have a sworn affidavit from numerous, poll watchers.
He literally says every episode Antifa's coming to get you, and there's going to be a civil war brought on by the far radical left because of how woke they got. And it's good that Trump eliminated critical race theory because that's only feeding into the mayhem. Like, oh my God.
But
dude.
I'm not going to come out and scream the election was stolen and Trump won. I'm just going to say we should investigate this. It doesn't really work very well for the mainstream media to smear me as some kind of conspiracy theorist when I don't make an assertion beyond here's a fact. So ultimately, I find myself in this weird position where, for one, if you go to like my flagship channel with the most subscribers, it's like basically the media is trash and the Democrats are too. So then people see that and they say Tim Pool must be right wing. But then when it comes to actual policy, like my politics are probably, independent center left, and I disagree with conservatives on a lot of core issues
What
that
issues?
result in Trump supporters getting mad at me. It's a weird position. I don't know, but ultimately that's where I'm at now. And
What
then I
issues?
guess at some point Ben Shapiro hit me up and asked me to come on his show. So yeah.
So I want to talk with you about, you obviously were covering Antifa. You've covered in detail Black Lives Matter, and you mentioned sort of the woke phenomenon. I want to talk about the phenomenon, and then I want to talk about what I think is actually a more important issue, which is the meta phenomenon of how social media and the media refuse to cover this phenomenon. How
Yeah.
they have decided that certain narratives
What are
worth
they talking
cultivating,
about?
and certain narratives must be barred, certain narratives must be suppressed.
They want the media to go on and be like, these college campuses are brainwashing our kids to be more liberal Marxist and teaching them about Black Lives Matter and making them Antifa. That's what they want the mainstream media to
Because
do.
to me, that is the scarier. The scarier phenomenon is sort of the mainstream deciding what we can and cannot see.
Oh no, ad coming, ad coming.
There's
Oh
the
no.
radicals, and
Oh no. Oh, that was a close one. All right.
but they're kind of a small proportion of the population. Then you actually have like this mainstream phenomenon of attempting to quash any discussion of the radicalism, which effectively makes them enablers. We'll get to that in 1 second. First, let's talk about a simple fact. It is your responsibility to take care of your family and get life insurance, right? Are you a responsible human being with that? Antifa are alternatively World War II era Allied troops storming the beaches of Normandy. We've been told by
U-boats.
Joe Biden that they are not, in fact, a group, that they are, in fact, just sort of a philosophy, sort of like cubism or something, like an artistic movement.
Huh?
What exactly is Antifa, since you've covered them on the ground?
It's it's not necessarily wrong to say that they're a movement or an idea, but
Okay.
it's the individual cells that we're talking about. I think what you're talking about. And what they do is the mainstream media uses a semantic argument to try and act like they don't exist. So to put it simply, Antifa is the symbols they use, the ideology. Typically, you'll find many of these people are authoritarian communists, and I'm not trying to exaggerate or do some stupid. Oh, they're all communists. No, like they're literally they believe
Okay. He might not be wrong about that point.
in authoritarian communism, but it's rooted in pre-World War II Germany, Weimar Germany, where you had the Communist Party had their anti-fasciste action, and it was challenging the fascists. They use the same symbols. They create small individual groups with. They say no
Wait,
leader.
who were the fascists? Who were they challenging? So, the legacy of the current Antifa, as Tim Pool is saying, is being in Germany challenging the fascists, and the fascist party was...
So they have leaders. They do. And then they coordinate for various actions. They call them nationwide. So ultimately, what you have are political zealots who believe in the use of violence for...
No, zealots are people who fall to things like fascism, like the cult of personality. You can have that on the left too, but zealotry is a
gain and
different
terror.
term.
For political gain. What they'll do is they'll
Terror
tell
for
you,
political
and they'll have
gain?
allies in media tell you, there's no such thing as Antifa.
Okay, I'm sick of hearing this narrative. Nico House talks about it too. That Antifa has allies in mainstream media. Are you kidding me?
It's not a group. Well, that's a semantic manipulation. They're playing a game here. If I say Antifa came out in Portland and attacked people, I'm talking about Rose City Antifa. It's a legitimate group. They have membership. They have membership drives. They put out, flyers or they put out a website saying, here's how you join our group. They have their own merchandise that says Rose City Antifa on it. So it would be like, the media is trying to use wordplay to trick you into believing that these various groups don't exist. Because if I said, I went to Portland and Antifa came out, then I went to Boston and Antifa came out. They say, aha, see, that proves it, because there's no connection between those two groups. But it's the general idea is they hold that same ideology, wearing all black. They use similar tactics. They use the same symbols, and they typically agree with each other on their cause and their means to the end. So you actually have a loose-knit group of various cells that coordinate with each other, using violence against their political opponents, for the most part, instigating it outright.
Instigating it. Okay, from the historical example to what he's talking about in contemporary standards, the instigators were always on the right. Antifa is a reaction to fascism. They only show up when fascism is happening. You never have an Antifa rally. Like, I'm not Antifa, obviously, but you don't just have like, all right, guys, we're having an Antifa rally. They are counter protesters. They might show up at a BLM event, but they're counter protesters. And he's talking about all these weird things about using violence for political gain, as if they're like some type of group that has a vested, like they're an interest group that gains personally from their action.
To win. and it works for them. You know, the example I
them?
often give to people, why is it that social media is so willing to censor right-wing individuals, but Antifa is literally organizing violent riots online, even probably right now. They've been doing it, all
And this
year.
is the danger of being able to have a huge platform and talk about stuff with literally no examples of like actual factual information. And when Tim Pool does talk about different news stories, he uses Breitbart, he uses Newscast, he uses OAN, he uses all these fake news sites. And this is really the danger of it, because he could make shit up, he could use anecdotes, and people will believe it.
And for the past several years. And it's simple. Antifa in, say, San Francisco in the Bay Area, they'll show up to the headquarters of these big tech companies and they'll trash the place. So these companies say, well, leave them alone. But
What?
there's not going to be a conservative group
When? Where?
marching to Twitter HQ with pitchforks and torches.
There's not
So-
going to be okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Remember to bring your masks for the next Joe Biden Antifa meeting. Yes, thank you, Lee.
So long as big companies keep giving Antifa what they want or showing them their tactics work, they'll keep doing what they do. As for the loose-knit nature of what they do, it's all on
He
purpose.
can't point to any specific examples of any of this, by the way. Tim Pool, the Antifa understander.
The reason why they don't have an official nationwide organization is it's actually really easy to understand when you look at the Proud Boys. Obviously, the Proud Boys and Antifa are not the same things, but there are similarities in that you have these groups that fight on the ground. The Proud Boys have a chairman, Enrique Tarrio. Well, they've banned him from dozens of banks. They've banned him from all these different platforms. You give someone a leader, they use that to actually try and discredit the rest of your group. Antifa knows this. I've actually talked to people going back to Occupy Wall Street who have straight up said, no leaders. As soon as you put someone up, they'll smear, they'll character assassinate. So it is on purpose they say they don't have leaders. However, law enforcement knows who the individual cell leaders are, I would imagine.
Can
And
we
I think-
find any articles to back up anything he's saying? Because he's saying that Antifa is working with mainstream media. And by the way, I think he said before, Antifa supports Joe Biden, which is laughable. And also Antifa goes to Twitter and big tech companies and just organizes violent rallies to trash their storefronts and their businesses, like their buildings. Like what?
Some of
What?
them got doxxed recently. So it's really, it's not, their tactics aren't perfect, but I will say the left is much, much better at street level organizing than the right. And so you end up with a media narrative that can't understand what Antifa is or outright defends them on purpose. I think there's two things. You've got the activist media that hates Donald Trump, and they're saying, Antifa's no big deal, but they're saying it because they want to protect Antifa.
Yes, source, believe me, bro. Don Lemon and Chris Hayes and all them, they want to just protect Antifa.
Have these local reporters, these people
True.
who are probably, they have good intentions. They're trying to be objective and fair, but they can't grasp the concept of Antifa as a group because Antifa has specifically obfuscated what they really are. So you can't report on what they are. Then you get someone like, say, Andy No or Elijah Schaffer, someone like at one point what I was doing, and we can accurately break it down and report on the ground. They get really angry about that. And we all saw what happened to Andy No, when he was out there in Portland, they physically beat him. They left him bleeding and covered in, milkshake and stuff like that. Those are the people they're really worried about. But long story short, they're radical far left. They typically are authoritarian communists, but not all of them. Some of them might just be, they might be like left anarchist. I know there's a big debate over whether or not anarchists can actually be left or right, but they view themselves that way. They'll view themselves as
The old I learned it in a civics class in like 9th grade. Anarchists are actually on the right side of the political spectrum. Yeah, I don't know if you guys knew that.
socialists. But the big issue I see with Antifa is that you might find someone who will try and lie and justify, no, we don't believe in violence. It's self-defense.
Unless if you're an ANCAP.
But these are the narratives they
you know.
like to use to get away with what they do. And so long as you have these mainstream resistance type Democrats who hate Trump,
Imagine being one of these white guys, because that's their audience. These incel white guys that are really scared about America being overtaken by minorities. They know whites are going to be the are going to be the minority when it comes to like, oh, 51% of the population is going to be not white. And they're hearing this guy talk about the radical left, communist anarchists who are going to come burn down your cities, who are also, of course, banding together with big tech media. And, they have a deal with Twitter also. And by the way, like Republican Party leaders have also floated the George Soros conspiracy theory. So imagine being that guy at home watching this and being like, oh, okay, the war's coming. I got to get my guns ready. I got to go make sure to vote for Donald Trump. Like, this is such a dangerous guy to have, to have a platform. Literally no one to hold him to count. And I know Vosh was on his stream before, but like, even that didn't do anything to even make a chink in his armor.
They won't call these groups out. And that's been something I've experienced going back to Occupy Wall Street, where the peaceful, legitimate protesters are told by these groups to respect their, quote,
none of what he's saying is in the realm of truth. The FBI, they wanted to have the FBI step in, but they wouldn't. So there's no organizations on the... Yeah, it's all... Yeah.
Diversity
it's
of
all
tactics.
filtered.
It's the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Certified.
The
whatever
idea
the
that
word
you're
is.
going to engage in some kind of strategy against a big system, but diversify what that strategy is makes no sense. You want to have a cohesive plan as to how you're going to make change happen. The reality is these groups say respect our diversity of tactics because that's code for getting violent and hurting people.
Yeah, and also the biggest threat worldwide and in the United States, according to our intelligence department, and also globally, like I just said, I think the number is 67 to 70% of all terrorism is caused by right-wing terrorism and right-wing extremism. And that is also the biggest threat in America as well.
And then you get these good-natured protesters who just want to, wave their little signs and banners and be heard, now standing back as Antifa messes with people, knocks them down, starts fires. So I will say, I think Antifa, for the most part, is a colloquial term we use to describe the far-left extremists who use what's called the black bloc tactic, where, they wear hoodies, they wear masks. I don't know what we'll call them in the future. We just called them the black bloc anarchists, 10 years ago. Now they're Antifa. They're still here. They're still rioting. Apparently, the media calling it for Joe Biden did nothing to change their minds. And in fact, I think it's only likely to escalate as if we do enter a Joe Biden administration, because certainly Joe Biden won't be strong enough to deal with these groups that are pressuring him and attacking him and getting violent. And we already saw this. I believe recently they attacked a DNC headquarters saying F Joe Biden. So anyway, there you go. I think I ranted too much on what Antifa is, but we can, follow up.
That's, I think, very useful for people who sort of have a vague idea, but not a very specific.
Very useful. Now, okay, how many people watched this so far? 230,000 watched this. This was out 3 hours. Oh my God.
Specific idea. And then meanwhile, we've seen the media basically decide that you are never allowed to criticize not only Antifa, but also Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter itself is considered to be a wonderful movement. There's been a game that you mentioned there, this sort of semantic overload that has been placed on the term Black Lives Matter, which, as I've pointed out on my show, means three separate things, one of which is completely unobjectionable and two of which are rather objectionable, one of which is the idea that Black people's lives matter, which of course everybody agrees with unless you're a complete piece of human dreck. Second, the Black Lives Matter actual organization, which is a far-left communist organization in its inception and openly states its goals. And third, the basic underlying idea that America is systemically racist, evil since root, and that all inequality is at root inequity, which I think is both counterproductive and false. But we...
Yeah, okay. This is his go-to argument. It's been debunked so many times. America was not founded on racism.
We've been told that to even question Black Lives Matter
True.
is to itself be racist, and that if you are to pay attention to any of the riots around the country, that's just exaggerating the problem. I mean, after all, only 7% of the Black Lives Matter protests erupted into riots, which is a pretty...
Only 3%, and the number isn't based on erupting into riots, by the way. It's if a protest was not completely peaceful, then it's in the category of not peaceful. It's not, when they have that study that's like 93% of protests were completely peaceful, they aren't saying 7% were all-out riots. They're saying 7% were not fully peaceful. This is, oh my God.
Shocking.
Jesus.
Only. That word only is doing a lot of work in that particular sentence.
By the way, if anyone ever says to you, something about property damage and BLM, but these people also say they support what was happening in Hong Kong. I think the damage from BLM, from different riots this year in America was like $1 billion, and they freak out about that number. When it comes to Hong Kong, I think the number was $60 billion in property damage.
Right. And they also didn't explain that I think of that 7%, there was like numerous cities constantly
dollars in
being
property
besieged by
damage.
this. So they were like, I could be wrong about this, but counting one city's widespread rioting as just one protest. But yeah, I think it's funny if you said something like, you know, uh, John Smith only kills 7% of the people he encounters, you'd be like, that's ridiculous. Or maybe killing people is a bit extreme. What if he said,
Or what about the COVID numbers? What about COVID? If you say people above the age of 60 only have a 2% chance to die from COVID, and you have a room of 100 people, and you say, oh, and a room of 100 people, 2 drop dead.
don't worry about Bill. He doesn't punch 93% of the people he encounters. I'd be like, he shouldn't punch any of them. It's really weird how they tried. Oh, it's 93% peaceful. I'm like, so you're admitting it's not? Like that's weird. These are violent riots.
Wow, how dare they evaluate objective reality instead of anecdotes?
And another thing that they didn't mention is that in many of these cities where they say there were peaceful protests, they would separate when the riot happened from the protest and act like, oh no, this day was a peaceful protest, even though the same people were there doing much of the same thing. On this day, the police didn't say there was riots or there was violence. And so it's really difficult to weed through exactly what's going on. But I will say, peaceful protests are awesome. It's foundational to this country. The First Amendment says peacefully, peaceably assemble. And I think it's fantastic when people go out and do so. And to varying degrees.
Yeah, so if there's a huge injustice on your people, you should simply peacefully protest and stand there and not make any noise. You know, after 5 years go by, after 10 years go by, after 15 years go by, after 20, after your entire life goes by, peacefully protesting and nothing changes, you should keep on peacefully protesting. America isn't built on, people actually taking things into their own hands or anything.
I'm totally cool with even civil disobedience. If they want to block traffic, okay, you get arrested, you get your fine, you're slapped on the wrist, you
Pretty
made your
based,
point, we heard you.
Cool.
We want to make sure there's room for people to actually express themselves, protest. And so early on, we did see with Black Lives Matter, there were things where they would just lay in the street with their hands behind their back. I thought that was really cool. Everybody knew it was coming. They expected it. They avoided certain routes. Then these people went home and they made their point. And that actually benefits.
Guys, if you're going to protest, do it in a nice, civil way, really planned out. Warn people beforehand so they know when to, they could take a different route to drive. Block a road somewhere in the middle of like a town no one's really in. Block a road and, make sure there's a detour set up so people can drive right past you. That's how you do a proper protest, and that's how you get change.
Them in the polls. It generates public awareness as it's supposed to, and it makes people sympathetic. But then we get these extremists who think they're, la resistance, fighting against Orange Hitler to like take down a federal building, which is made of like hundreds or thousands of tons of concrete, and they're throwing fire, mortar shells at it. It's like they're playing a game. They're live action role playing. They're not aware. They're not actually doing anything. But I will say what I find funny about, the Black Lives Matter stuff we've seen this past year is they're mostly white. It's mostly upper middle class, suburban, white, young progressives saying they're fighting for minorities. You end up with these videos where there's 2 black women walking up to these 2 white women who are vandalizing a building, and they're like, "Why are you doing this?" And they're like, "Don't worry, we're doing it for you." And it's like,
doing it for you.
There's no intent.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that the left can't have any zealotry, but that's mostly attributed to the other side, and they were ignoring that point. My bad if I worded it bad in a wrong way.
We talk about the 3 different Black Lives Matter you mentioned. It's mostly used as some kind of shield.
Yeah, this is painful
for radical far leftists who are they're trying to convince people we're the good guys because racism is bad. But when they go out and they destroy businesses in black neighborhoods, they clearly don't care. When they accuse actual outspoken black people, say Candace Owens, of being a white supremacist, they clearly don't care. They're using race as a shield while they engage in racist or violent behavior. And then they use these, it's a really, really clever trick that these leftists do. Anti-fascist. We're anti-fascist. Therefore, if you oppose us, you're pro-fascist. It's like, dude, you're walking around beating people. Then they say, we're for Black Lives Matter. That's our group. If you oppose us, you think they don't. It's like, well, clearly that's not the case. You're going around smashing things and beating people and actually hurting the black community. It's all just clever wordplay. And I think it's all built upon manipulating the media. They want the media to actually, let me stop. I'll put it this way.
The media during the BLM protest did a really bad disservice to actual people who were trying to activists, because they would only turn the cameras on when there were protests with fire. That one video of the guy saying, what was the quote? The anchor said it's relatively peaceful or something, and he's in front of a burning car or something. The media did a terrible job. They don't cover peaceful protesting. They don't get ad revenue off of that. They don't get clicks off of that. They get clicks off of covering riots. The media is against BLM. The media is against Antifa.
I decided I'm going to start an organization called the Weak and Vulnerable Grandmothers. That way, when my organization of 30-year-old men go around yelling things, the media will report Antifa attacks weak and vulnerable grandmothers. That's like an idea of what they're doing. So it's a trick. Most people just read the headline. They don't actually investigate what the story is. So I get people telling me things all the time like, oh, but they're anti-fascist. They're the good guys. I'm like, did you see the video of them beating the old woman?
Did you see the one video I saw on Facebook? The one video without any context? The one example of one thing happening one time? That totally shows a good enough example of how you should evaluate, everything basically.
Like, oh no, I didn't actually read it. Well, that's the name. It's the name, anti-fascist. It's not the action, and the actions are what you need to look for.
So I want to talk about the broader danger of these movements, which I don't think is the actual movements. I think it is the mainstreaming of the movements by more mainstream groups, the Democratic Party, the mainstream media, and social media. To me, what's happening in a lot of left-wing politics right now, it's almost like the stories that you read in the newspapers and online about some elderly Hollywood star who's aging and doesn't like aging, and so has hired a 20-year-old and is now siphoning off their blood in order to cycle it through their system in the belief that the oxygenated blood will make them more healthy over time. I feel like right now that's sort of the Democratic Party with the woke and with the radical. Like, well, this is where all the energy is, and we don't want to quash the energy.
Oh yeah, definitely, Dino. It's like that Vosh and Destiny versus Eric Stryker debate, where they kept on bringing up like one example of certain things, and Vosh and Destiny had a whole list of statistics.
So we're going to allow that energy to fester, and they'll leave us alone because we mostly agree with them. So long as we direct that energy, at the bad people, at the orange Hitler, at the orange man bad, and at all the conservatives, and at all the people online we don't like. Well, then they're really, maybe they're overzealous, but they're doing the right things, and eventually they'll grow out of this and they'll stop messing around with this. It's a really dangerous thing.
Yep, it's not going to stop. They're playing with fire, and I got to be honest. I don't even think it's the youthful energy. I think it's Twitter. I think
it's Twitter.
You've got hyperpolarization due to places, social media platforms like Twitter. I think Twitter is the worst. It's really hard to get a complex idea out on Twitter. So I've mostly just given up and I just roll with it. I laugh when people take things the
Tim Pool, okay. It's hard to get a complex idea out on Twitter if you have no complex ideas, Tim Pool.
Wrong way. It's like, yeah, well, whatever. But someone will put something out. It'll be interpreted in completely the wrong way. And what Twitter does is it encourages people to be as nasty as possible. What I see happening is it's also with Facebook. It's with keyword stuffing and algorithmic boosting that we see through Facebook. Certain posts that have certain words are more likely to get shares and more likely to appear.
Yeah, this is what Tim Pool takes advantage of, though. So, like, if you follow Tim Pool on YouTube, they have that data. They are going to sell that data to different companies. Therefore, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, if you're on Twitter, you're going to get recommended videos of rioting. But if you're on the left and you watch Vosh, if you watch anyone on the left, Hassan, if you go on Facebook and Twitter, we will have different experiences. You're going to see a lot of police brutality videos.
You end up with a very small faction of hyperactive internet users posting on Twitter trying to get likes.
But okay, remember the one article Tim Pool posted claiming the one Pinkerton who was defending the bodyguard for the news reporter. He shot and killed the guy, right? You guys know that story. So he shot and killed the guy. Everyone said this bodyguard was Antifa. And Tim Pool shared an article saying, this is Antifa, this is them attacking. And it got shared like 50,000 times or whatever. Like millions of people saw it. And then in the comments, he said, guys, correction, he wasn't Antifa. And like only 500 people saw that, correction. So Tim Pool, whatever he's attacking right now, he, in action, he completely contradicts it.
So what happens is, you'll see ridiculous stories like there was one from the Huffington Post that said, there may be a video of Donald Trump in an elevator doing something. What is that thing? We don't know. Where is the elevator? We have no idea. And does the video exist? We're not sure. They actually wrote that article.
That's literally what you do.
A desperate attempt to just write something that will
That's
get
your
clicks
thing.
And shares, salacious.
You have 3 YouTube channels. This guy has 3 YouTube channels. He posts about like 4 videos a day to each channel. He does a 2-hour live stream on the one channel. This is literally Tim Pool's entire career.
They didn't have anything, so
that
they
he's
just wrote nothing.
talking against.
But what ends up happening is you also get cancel culture. People are rewarded and cheered for when they're like, look at this person who's a bigot. All of a sudden now, we've gamified this process on social media. You get more points, you get more retweets, you get more followers. And in fact, you can make money doing this. You'll see people say, here's a thread about why Ben Shapiro is a Nazi. And then they'll put at the bottom, here's my PayPal link, give me money. They'll take everything you say out of context. The more people share it, though, the more misinformed they're becoming. Then you get the Democratic politicians who think Twitter is real life. And they see those Twitter threads and they say, I'm going to campaign on this issue about weird social justice.
Okay, so the point he's saying is wrong, but I agree that people focus too much on Twitter politics and extrapolate that to what people are thinking on the ground in the real world. Like, if you yell onto Twitter your entire life and then you talk to a regular American, things are going to be a little bit different. But what Tim Pool is saying, that the politicians who stand for things like trans rights, for example, or, healing systemic inequities with racism, systemic racism and all that. He's saying those people are too consumed by Twitter because they care about those issues. So he's not making the same point I am for why Twitter's
cancel
bad.
culture. Then you get some 38-year-old mother who's like, are my kids going to school? Why is the guy on TV talking about some Twitter thread? What's happening? I think to an extent, Republicans also fall victim to this as well. I think it's funny when they're talking about Twitter censorship. You see, Ted Cruz bring it up. I appreciate it because I use the internet. But I have to wonder if we have only about 22% of this country using Twitter, and only I think it's like 10 or so, 8% of those are actually
now he's
active.
contradicting his point he
It must
was
be
making
really
about
weird
the
to
left.
be a regular American turning on the news and then hearing them talk about social media culture war issues that mean nothing to you, which
Like
I think
what?
may explain, why the Republicans took so many seats in the House this time around, and even why Donald Trump is losing to Joe Biden as it stands so far. I think regular people are like, I don't care about Twitter. I don't care about these culture war issues.
What kind of
But I do
evaluation
think,
is
for the
this?
most part, it's the Democrats that are mostly susceptible to it because they're looking for the youth vote. Like you mentioned, they're looking for youthful energy. They're finding it on social media where the young people are extremely active. And instead of telling them, hey, just because your tweet went viral doesn't mean it was correct or good, they're saying, I'll just go with it and say what they're saying. And then you end up with really weird policy positions like, Bernie Sanders in 2015 says, we can't have open borders. It's a Koch brothers proposal. That was an interview with Vox. Now he's on the debate stage, just this past year saying moratorium on deportations and decriminalized border crossings. He completely flips on what his principles are. And it's because of the things people are posting on social media.
So if you want to, you want to prevent or delay deportations, and you also want to decriminalize border crossings. So it's not a federal offense, and that to Tim Pool means open borders. Okay.
Represent America. I think it's interesting. Trump.
You know what? I'll give him credit. He gave his first example of the night. 40 minutes in, Tim Pool finally gave one example of something.
On a message that seemed to fly in the face of what, social justice was pushing on social media. And it, in my opinion, shows with PC culture being one of the big aspects that people cite when they say why they voted for Trump. Regular people don't care about this. Democrats have walked themselves into a corner. I don't see how they get themselves out now. You see AOC is attacking the Democrats, saying, the House would have fared better if you just let me lead and be progressive. Now you got Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks writing a wall.
I'm muted. Okay, so I am muted. I know I'm muted. I'm recovering. But when AOC makes these criticisms, she's saying these boomers, these Democratic boomers, are not using things like Facebook, like Twitter, like online ad revenue. It's not simply just progressive policies. It's a whole smorgasbord of these things combined.
Wall Street Journal op-ed saying, let progressives take over. And I can only imagine that would end up with them losing in the most absurd defeat ever, because then the Republican Party becomes the big tent. You end up with people like Jeff Van Drew, who was a Democrat, switches to the Republican Party, wins re-election. These people don't realize Ocasio-Cortez may have 10 million followers on Twitter, but those 10 million people don't live in like one city. She doesn't have command over one massive district. She has little pockets of individuals from various jurisdictions that don't hold political power in those areas. And they're trying to legislate based off of the fact that they've created a community of political zealots on social media that doesn't represent this country, but they think it does because they've gathered in this one online space. So long story short, expect more as the aging Democrats don't know what they're doing.
Expect more
as
what?
Nancy Pelosi tries to placate the squad and then gives them what they want, refuses to denounce socialism. Once Nancy Pelosi and Feinstein and Schumer and Nadler, once they're all out, all that's going to be left is the Twitter politicians, the people who want to be celebrities, who want to do Instagram live videos, get as many clicks as possible. I don't see them legislating. I see them trying to do things that are funny and get them clicks and shares on Twitter and social media.
Is he attacking AOC, going on Twitch and playing Among Us?
And I think AOC exemplifies, I'll put it this way, just to make everybody angry. I think AOC is very much like Donald Trump in that she tweets bombastic things, gets a bunch of attention for herself, and she loves it.
Yep.
The difference is I think Donald Trump is naturally like this. I think he really did have plans and he wanted to do things for this country. And we had a great economy over the past several years. We have these historic peace agreements. And then you have AOC, who, in my opinion, seems to be just trying to get as many followers and, I guess, attention as possible.
What?
The backlash that we saw in the last election to defund the police.
AOC and Donald Trump are similar because they post to Twitter, but Donald, I don't care.
To talk about socialism, to all the focus on supposed systemic American racism. I think that backlash really did materialize. I think that there was also a pretty significant backlash to exactly the sort of cancel culture that you're talking about. I think most Americans, you're exactly right, don't turn on the news at night and wonder what somebody said on Twitter, but they do see at their own companies, the ones that they work at, that so many of the elites at the top of our corporate world have decided to buy into the cancel culture mentality where unless you personally post a black square on your Facebook page, you are now called into question if you don't repeat.
No, it's that thing. It's hard to beat stupidity. Like if you argue with somebody who's really confident and brings up only conspiracy theories, how do you prove them wrong?
Repeat and believe, then you are now a suspect. And if you say the wrong thing at the office, the cancel culture comes for you. You might find yourself on Twitter one day. So it's not that Twitter is a place for gathering and trading ideas. Twitter is a place for coming after you. And so whoever uses Twitter that way,
if you're a white Christian conservative, then you are under attack. You are under attack.
Uses the political mechanism
you will
that
die.
way. I think there's a huge backlash brewing to this because the left has decided that they're going to shut the Overton window. They're going to shut it tight. They're going to wish all their enemies out into the cornfield. And then they believe that this is somehow going to achieve them a majority. I think that Trump was just the beginning of the backlash. He may not have been a great vehicle for the backlash because he's such a flawed character in and of himself. But the backlash is not going to stop just because, Democrats believe they've defeated Trump.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think you're right. I think to kind of just, clarify my point, I think regular people don't care about these specific issues of like white patriarchy and, recognizing your white privilege.
White patriarchy.
But now they're being subjected to it, like you said. So they end up going to work, being brought into these training sessions, and they don't like it. I mean, it was a trope for so long. We make fun of the
training sessions. Do you mean sensitivity training or
sexual
diversity
harassment,
training?
workplace videos. It's a
sexual
comedy bit.
harassment.
But now you've got people actually being forced to live through this, and they are scared of cancel culture.
They're being forced to live through not sexually harassing people and watching documentaries on why not to harass women, and they have to make sure not to be racist. No. Twitter cancel culture is coming too far.
And that's the big problem I see with the Democrats. They're entertaining it at a policy level as if anybody likes this. I got to be honest. I don't even think the leftists who participate like it. I think they're all standing in the mob with pitchforks, nervously shaking, wondering which one is going to point the finger at them. And they're safer in the mob.
That's what I am. I am freaked out. If I am not the perfect liberal, if I am not the perfect leftist, I will get canceled. I will lose my life.
Being the target of the mob.
I totally
do not want
agree
to be
with
the target
this.
of
This
I
is
totally
where
agree with this.
Social media really does get dangerous, not just because of its ability to mobilize mobs. I've stated that when it comes to social media, it used to be that in order to form a mob, you usually had to have a cause. Very often it was a horrible cause, but you had to have at least a point of comedy.
They have no cause.
And then it was like, okay,
no
let's get together
cause.
the mob and let's go do X bad thing. Now, social media is just a mob waiting for a cause. It's just a bunch of people milling around, waiting for it's almost like a badly motivated immune system where we'll just
Immune
identify the
system?
cell, everybody swarm, and that
Cancel culture is such a small part of Twitter. It's so freaking exasperated, the actual effects of it. Like, oh my God, it's so over exaggerated. It's a swarm that's like, come on. It's literally like a thousand people on
is a
Twitter.
huge problem, obviously. I also
And the cancel culture they're talking about is the cancel culture that doesn't make sense. Of course, if you do something really effed up, you're gonna get canceled. But
deeply concerned about the way that social media has decided that they are simply going to suppress information they don't like. And this goes back to the.
if you do something bad enough, it's not called being canceled.
About Antifa and
It's
BLM.
such bullshit.
You
I
had
hate
this
everything.
very famous exchange with some of the big tech heads on Joe Rogan's show, where you were just pointing out to them that they have no consistent standards by which they suppress certain people and suppress certain content. That they are just doing this basically out of their ass. I mean, they're just coming up with this policy completely out of nowhere.
This is when the free market, small government, classical liberal conservative libertarians come out and say, these social media companies, I think we need a government program to regulate them. We need to take control. We need to nationalize Twitter because they're trying to censor our free speech. Why can I not share this video of Keemstar being beat up by black guys in a video that he staged? I don't get it. I'm under attack.
And then just implementing it, but it seems to always skew to one side. It's never as though they make the mistake of, oops, we banned Louis Farrakhan. It's more like, oops, we banned this person. We banned James Woods for a day. I guess we shouldn't have banned James Woods for a day. Okay, fine. Well, I guess we can bring back James Woods. Or, you know what? Let's all get together. And, Alex Jones, he's been bothering us for a while. So we will all together at the same time decide, just spontaneously, that we are getting rid of Alex Jones. Not because he is...
Alex Jones says... These are topics I don't even want to have to debate because they're so outlandish and so stupid. Like Alex Jones, the shit he says on there.
necessarily violated our policies, but because we have decided that we don't like Alex Jones anymore. Now, listen, as everybody knows, I am no Alex Jones fan, but you don't just all get together and decide they're going to change your standards randomly and then ban Alex Jones because you don't like Alex Jones that day and expect that we are going to have trust in your objectivity or your status as a neutral platform for ideas.
Yeah, it's the Ben Shapiro and
Gentlemen, is the threat real?
Ad. Oh, there's Reagan. The new Call of Duty game. Cold War.
Tim Agree show. Thanks for joining us. But I agree. Alex, think about this. Why was Alex Jones banned from all these platforms? It's because of one thing he said.
Okay, what did he say?
One topic he brought up.
What
he brought it
topic?
up a couple times about Sandy Hook. Because of this, years later, they resurface these claims and demand he be censored from every single platform. I think Jones has been around for 3 decades. I think he said some really crazy things, especially on Joe Rogan's podcast. But the idea that you could have 3 decades of work purged from the internet for saying
3
one
decades
bad
of
thing
work
on a few
for
occasions.
saying one bad
That's
thing
crazy.
on a few occasions.
Imagine if you get a scientist who's talking about the importance of, mask wearing or best ways to prevent COVID. And then
they say to make sure the only way to prevent another pandemic is if you go and kill all your neighbors and they get kicked off of social media. I don't get it.
a month later, he says some off-color joke, so they purge him completely from
It's
social
not
media.
an off-color joke.
Yeah.
Saying
All
that
of the important
Sandy
things he's
Hook isn't real, saying that COVID isn't real, saying that historical events aren't real, saying that the lizard people stuff, all this stuff people actually believe. Oh my God,
gone as
I
well.
can't even deal
Not
with
that
this.
I'm here to defend Alex Jones's body of work. I honestly don't really watch it or know much about it other than when I see those viral clips of him saying kind of crazy things.
Sandy Hook was fake.
But the idea that you would eliminate someone from the internet forever and
It's
just
just
over
a joke.
saying one thing one time, or even if it was like 3 strikes and you're out, I think that's crazy.
For saying something one time or maybe even a couple times. It's like when they see conservative or Donald Trump say something that is really bad. Oh, he's just joking. He's just kidding. It's a joke. They see AOC say, or they see like Bernie Sanders when he made the joke about like nationalizing Google. They're like, okay, guys, they're coming for us. DEFCON 8. They're going to come kill us now.
One of the things that Jack Dorsey said to me when I was talking to him on the Joe Rogan podcast was, we talked about a path to redemption. Never happened. It's crazy to me that you could break the rules on Twitter and they say you're permanently banned for life.
Yeah, Alex Jones is still on the internet. Twitter is a private company. They're allowed to make decisions like that.
It's like we don't even do that in the real world for most things. You go to prison, we give you a time limit, and then you can come back later on. They don't allow that. I think the other really important thing though, when you bring up the Twitter's arbitrary rules is, I think, one of the big reasons why they're banning conservatives more than they ban the left is because they live in that bubble. They're all very far left in Silicon Valley and wherever.
No, corporations operate based on their profits, and Tim Pool doesn't understand capitalism at all. It's because people on the left occupy Twitter much more than people on the right do, so they make decisions that fall in line with what will make them money. Also, there are liability issues with allowing people to spread disinformation on your platform. That's another reason why they do that. It's very simple. It's not conspiratorial at all, actually.
They make the rules. They don't interact with conservatives or even moderates for that matter. So when they have parents who are moderates and they say they're far right or whatever, to them, it's abnormal and it's offensive. And we must remove the offensive things. The best example of this, which I brought up to Jack Dorsey, and this is now, two years ago almost, the misgendering policy on Twitter. They said if you misgender someone, you can be banned. But that's a worldview of a very tiny percentage of people. I was like, you're basically creating a rule that upholds the worldview of 8% of the population. If we go by the YouGov data, then about 8% are progressive activists. The rest are not. So if you're telling people this is the real world, do things this way, and you don't realize that.
Twitter wants us to stop saying the N-word, although black people are such a minority. Are you kidding me?
You actually represent the extreme minority. Well, then you're going to start banning regular people, calling them far right. You're going to say, we're not biased. We're only getting rid of those who break the rules. But your rules would be broken by literally anybody. I mean, if you go to a regular person, an average person just walking down the street, and ask them about misgendering, they're going to say, I don't know what that is. If they sign up for Twitter, they'll get banned right away. And I've met people who this has happened to. I've met so many people who have only
I've met so many people. Source, trust me. Please.
A small amount of followers, maybe a couple dozen, maybe 100 or so, their friends and their family, and they'll post something and get banned and have no idea why. We don't live in this far left woke bubble with these people.
This is destroying me.
If you're, people like you and me, Ben,
I am physically deteriorating.
We can see their world. We watch the news. We see what they're saying, so we get it. Most people don't, and so these rules make no sense for the average person. Long story short, you end up with advertising brands that see how people are behaving on social media, and they assume this is popular discourse. These ideas make sense, but they don't, and regular people are confused by them. But once you get advertising agencies buying into this stuff, once you get movies buying into this stuff, it can cause a cultural shift. I am starting to wonder, though, if the get woke, go broke phenomenon is going to cost so much money for these companies. They realize we can't keep chasing after the woke crowd on Twitter.
I certainly hope that that's the case. I think that may only be the case if enough Americans are offended enough not to actually go by the products, because we do have a process of what Nicholas Nassim Taleb called renormalization happening, where you have a small minority that is extremely motivated and everybody else is just not as motivated. And so the small minority can move the entire train just by basically saying, we care super a lot about this issue and we're going to irritate the living crap out of you. And if you guys just leave us alone, if you just give us what we want, then we'll basically go away. And I think that you're seeing this taken to the extreme. There will come a point, however, when I think people are just like, you know what?
Oh, you got banned from Destiny?
It doesn't matter that this is a quote-unquote minor offense. You stack up the minor offenses, and eventually you get to, this is just one giant basic major offense against my sense of truth and the facts and propriety. And I think that's what's happening right now. I think the media have also picked up on the mainstream media, particularly the establishment media. They've picked up on the Silicon Valley bias, and now they are using it to their advantage. They're woke staffers inside the Silicon Valley outlets, and these woke staffers are running the show. They really are.
These woke staffers, the woke staffers are running the show of
and getting
America.
Op-ed editors fired for printing U.S. senators' op-eds. If you talk to any of the people in the top levels of tech, they will tell you that their woke staffers are driving them up a wall.
The woke staffers.
They're creating all sorts of problems. They're creating liability issues for them, and yet they won't stand up to the woke staffers. And so what you get now is not just the pressure from inside. You have this inside-outside game that I've identified since, obviously, I run a major conservative publication, and we've had our experiences being suppressed at extreme depth by social media. There's this inside-outside game that's being played now, where members of the mainstream media, people like Kevin Roose over at the New York Times, people like Kara Swisher at the New York Times, or Judd Legum, right, where they spend their days attempting to, quote-unquote, ask questions of tech bros that go something like this. Here is a bad thing a conservative said. Why don't you ban them? And it's every single day. And very often, it's not even a bad thing that a conservative said. It's just,
Okay, I want to see the example of a bad thing the conservative said.
you guys are helping conservatives. And they tie this all into Orange Hitler, right? They always talk about Orange Man bad. Facebook got Donald Trump elected. Therefore, that's because you allowed conservative content to fly free on Facebook. You really should suppress conservative content.
Fake news.
And so just this week, we saw this incredible exchange with Kevin Roose of the New York Times where he tweeted out 4 headlines. And he said, these headlines are misinformation and they're flying around Facebook. Every single headline was true. All 4 headlines were true. It was 2 from Breitbart. It was 1 from Daily Wire. And I believe it was 1 from Daily Caller. All 4 were true. And when I said to him, dude, all 4 of those are true. Those are not misinformation. He said,
Breitbart?
even if they are factually true, they can push a narrative that is untrue. And so they are misinformation, which just gives away the game. I mean, we basically
wanna
have
know what
establishment media saying,
examples
if you don't
they're
mirror
talking
our
about.
political priorities, you are now deemed misinformation, and we'll use our fact-checking brand to fact-check you, and we will use our power in order to leverage all of the social media outlets into shutting down anyone who is not the New York Times.
I love it because Kevin Roose ran this story on for the New York Times. It was a front page story about how YouTube radicalized some guy to the alt-right. When in reality, if you actually read the story, it was about a traditional conservative who went on YouTube, started watching videos, and then
He
eventually
found out the magical numbers. He found them. 1350.
became a liberal because YouTube moved him left. There's a lot of data that actually shows YouTube has a left bias. They don't
What?
a lot of these people like Roose don't want to admit it because they want power. This guy Kevin Roose is an activist. He's not a journalist, and I know him personally, and I can attest to this. When I worked for Fusion, he worked there as well. I think he was the managing editor. There was an issue that came up where there was an unprecedented social media ethics violation that occurred from the New York Times. It was when Ellen Pao was the CEO of Reddit, and she stepped down. The story was breaking news. The New York Times wrote a story that said, Ellen Pao, CEO, resigns. That was basically it. It became one of the highest ranking posts on Reddit of all time. But overnight, the New York Times changed the entire article to something like Silicon Valley 2, social justice 0, or feminism 0. And then the whole article wasn't breaking news. They used the same URL to turn it into an analysis op-ed about sexism in Silicon Valley. That's an ethical violation, a journalistic violation, and an internet violation. You don't just change the URL. But news organizations do this a lot. They're supposed to put updated, editor's note, here are the changes we made, and let people know. It's one thing, in my opinion, if a news outlet says, here's a headline, and then we add information and we updated to add this. It's another thing when they changed 85% of the article, turning a factual news article into an op-ed.
Soros, my boy.
And I reach out to
This is
some
a
moderators
Soros-funded
at Reddit,
channel.
and I ask them what the rules are on various subreddits for news outlets that do these things. And they said straight up, this is a huge violation, and we don't know what to do. It was like the third most
Okay, are they going to talk about something that's interesting? Because I got to go pick up some food.
in targeting their
And it's all Trump's fault, according to both Joe Biden and the Democratic media.
Okay, here we go.
line saying he did. I think the media in this country, for a variety of reasons, has become completely
Let's
invested
see it.
in just activism. So I will tell you, there's one thing that does excite me if Joe Biden ends up, being the actual inaugurated president, is that the media will spiral out of control and implode with nothing to write about anymore.
Yeah,
What?
this I think their
No.
greatest fear, and I think they're going to have
Their
to
greatest
craft,
fear?
a whole set of new villains, but none of them.
So does the left... Okay, wait. Does the left have a bias from the media? The media helps the left, or they help Trump because their incentives are to get Trump elected? Like, nothing they have said this entire time has made sense.
them are ever going to
It
be able
hurts
to take
my
the place
head.
of
Oh, yeah.
President Trump, who of course was the apotheosis of all evil on earth and an orange miasma of sin and terribleness. And actually the physical embodiment of COVID. That was my favorite narrative over the course
Yeah.
of this past year, is we have a disease that kills hundreds of thousands, now over 1 million people worldwide. And it's all Trump's fault, according to both Joe Biden and the Democratic media.
The
if it were not,
response in America, we're not talking about the worldwide death toll. And if the worldwide death toll is 1 million and America has 260,000 of those deaths, or 250,000, that's not good.
for Donald Trump, no one in America would have died. Actually, 0 people in America would have died. Meanwhile, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, is absolutely
No
incredible
one's
at handling
saying
COVID.
that.
In fact, he wrote an entire book about how great he is at
No.
handling COVID. And made
Stop.
an entire poster that you could buy and put on your wall about
I'm
how amazing he is at
defeated.
handling COVID. Also, by the way, New York is now having a second spike that is necessitating.
I lost the
apparently,
debate.
a lockdown. Let's talk about COVID policy for a second because you've covered it.
Wow. How did New York City get another spike in COVID? Can the class answer the question? There's a term called population density. Wow.
Again, in sort of a straightforward and heterodox fashion, there was all this talk very early on about the necessity for lockdowns. Quickly, this thing became quite politicized, as I mentioned here. The media's narrative
Everything
was,
is political.
this is all the right wing's fault.
Everything is political, and nothing he's saying is true. UK is on lockdown, France is on lockdown, the entire EU is on lockdown, and their economic outcomes are better than America's. So there you go. I've done a freaking video on that before.
And it's all Donald Trump's fault because Donald Trump is not focusing in on mask wearing because mask wearing is apparently a silver bullet. And also, Trump was doing public events.
It's like wearing a seatbelt. It just lowers the chance that you get it. Jesus.
Depends on the public event. COVID is an extraordinarily woke and wise virus. It only affects right-wingers and Orthodox Jews. Those are the only people.
The reason that the right-wingers got it is because they don't believe in this tools to prevent the spread. You idiot.
Yeah. If you are a black person who's protesting the systemic cruelty of the police, it does not affect you. If you are
the black people that were protesting all were wearing masks.
A white lib who's cheering on Joe Biden's supposed victory by drinking out of the same champagne bottle as three others, it doesn't affect you either.
That's not even anything. That doesn't even make sense to use as an example.
Obviously, the American trust in the media on COVID is at an all-time low. I think it should be at an all-time low. What do you make of the media coverage of COVID, and where do you think we're at on this thing?
I think we can clearly see the spikes. There's very real data showing that this year we had way more expected mortality than normal. So I'm not a big fan of these, like the conspiracy theories and stuff. There's obviously, COVID going on. And I think it's ridiculous that I even have to say that, but we're at that point.
Yep.
The problem is I blame the mainstream media for this. Because if you've got, there's viral videos going, memes showing all of these celebrations for Joe Biden being declared president-elect. And like you mentioned, they're sharing champagne. I love it when Joe Biden pulled his mask down to cough into his hand. They don't take this seriously.
That was months ago.
They don't care even. You've got I think it was a World Health Organization doctor saying no more lockdowns, should be a last resort. Let's not do this again. It's really dangerous because economic damage leads to death as well. Now you've got Cuomo.
Not if you have competent leaders. Furlough programs like they're doing in France, for example, keeps people on payrolls, makes sure businesses don't close. What Americans do, what America governance does, is terrible compared to what happens in the EU in most of the member states.
And Murphy in New Jersey instituting more lockdowns.
There are good policies.
It doesn't quite make any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense because human life is more important than profits. There's no economic damage. Okay, in an economy like ours, where so much of it is a service-based economy, you can essentially freeze all of those service sectors. You can do somewhat of, you're going to have some money leak out, but you can freeze those service sectors and have the economy remain stable. The only transactions you need to continue are, you have to keep the market somewhat stable, of course, it's whatever. But when it comes to food production, when it comes to hardware, when it comes to truck driving, when it comes to that stuff, the stuff that fundamentally keeps a society running, that's all you need to have operating in during times like this. All you need to have operating. In a service economy, literally most of our economy is made up. All of the economic principles of the modern age are all made up shit. All the freaking travel agents, casinos, cruise ships, that's all made up shit.
Almost like
that's not how economics works.
Because they're scared of the media, not the actual virus.
No, that's not how
they don't want to be. They don't want it to be said that they're responsible for the death.
I hate
because
him so much.
Hey, if we lock down,
dude,
and any
everything is
problems that
the
arise from
media.
lockdown is because we had to do it. But if they don't lock down, they'll blame them for for virus deaths.
God,
I think we've created a mass hysteria around this. If you look at the mortality rate of COVID, it is bad. It's a
he doesn't
bit
even
worse
know.
than the flu.
It's a bit worse than the flu. It's literally 30 times higher than the flu. That's not a bit worse. That's not a bit worse, and it spreads at a much higher rate than the flu. Holy crap!
I pretend like it's substantially worse, but it is higher. It's not the same as the flu. It's a lot higher, and there's lingering effects.
You just said it's the same, and there are lingering effects. It attacks the nervous system. It ages people. People are unable to regain some functions.
For the most part, you're only allowed to tell people the end is nigh. You know, if I remember early on YouTube, they made a rule that you couldn't talk about COVID at all. They would demonetize you. The only news we end up getting is going to say something like,
What
people
does
are
that
gonna
have to
die
do with
unless we
anything?
lock things down. If you come out and say, well, I think the lockdown could be worse, they say you want to kill grandma or something. So
Yes.
the media has created a social pressure to
If you
encourage.
say you think the lockdowns are going to be worse based off no evidence, based off no evaluation of anything other than you don't think there should be a lockdown, then yes, you are advocating for grandma to die for the economy.
people
Sorry.
to claim we must take the most extreme action possible. That's not healthy. If we can't have
That's
someone
not
come out and
healthy.
say, hey, we looked at the data, here's what we found, we should chill out. You can't really do that. I mean, you kind of can, but the incentive is to claim the world is burning down. So what happens? Politicians respond to it by locking things down.
Again, this is a simple incentives thing for media companies, and for COVID, the hysteria is very justified. You know what's not justified? Every year on 9/11, having these huge displays of emotion. Not because that's not justified, on its own merit. It is. It was a very dramatic time in American history. But not showing any compassion for what's happening right now during this pandemic makes 9/11 and all of the solidarity with our citizens on that day seem a little bit silly, don't you think? When we have 250,000 people dying from a pandemic, no one cares. But we're still talking about this attack, this terrible attack that happened 20 years ago.
Regular people put on masks when they're in their own bathrooms and they panic.
And
I've
off of 9/11, we all know all the damage that came out of that.
seen some people
After.
react in crazy ways over mask wearing. I was just riding my bike. I'm in a forest preserve, essentially, alongside a river. There's no one anywhere, and I see people riding bikes with masks on. I just found that to be very strange.
Maybe
You're
they're
by
at
yourself
risk.
in the woods, riding a bike. You need to
Who
breathe. Just
cares?
put a mask
Maybe they
on.
don't want the wind to go in their face. Who cares? Why are you such a snowflake? Why are you freaking out over this?
It's because the only news they're getting is this is the end.
Oh my god, when this COVID pandemic first started, dude, and there were posts on social media like, I can't believe people are wearing their masks in their cars while they're driving. Like, how much of a snowflake do you have to be for that to be your issue that you get pissed off about every single day? All these freaking conservatives, they get pissed off about having to, use the right pronouns for trans people, use the right gender, whatever the term is. Don't misgender trans people. You have to make sure that you don't have freaking microaggressions or something. Don't say the N-word. It just I can't do it.
I'll tell you what's really
I'm gonna
funny
die.
about all this.
During Christmas, oh my god, Starbucks doesn't say Merry Christmas on their cups anymore. I'm boycotting Starbucks.
I've invited numerous leftists to come onto my podcast, Timcast IRL, which is a sit-down conversation, kind of like what we're doing here. Conservatives will do it in 2 seconds. Moderate right-wing individuals, even, disaffected liberals who find them.
Literally like 20 people said they would come on Tim Pool's show, but he said they need to travel across the country to do it in person, and only Vosh did it so far. Destiny said he would do it as well, but Sam Cedar, Hassan, and so many other people wanted to do a remote interview or a remote podcast with Tim Pool.
Themselves say voting for Trump. They'll say, hey, fly me out. We take all the precautions, we treat it seriously, but we're not cowering from it. But I reach out to some of these prominent leftists on social media and stuff, and they say, I'm too scared of COVID to travel. So it's clearly affecting Democrats and the left and, actual, I don't want to say actual liberals, but whatever the resistance left has become, they're mortified of this. And it's
What's his
I don't know what's going to happen, but I tell you, if you've
What
got
point is he making?
two factions, which don't, I don't want to act like everyone on the right or even or like anti-woke crowd, like they agree on everything. But if they can agree on the fact that we can still do our jobs and function, they're going to generate more wealth. They're going to be more successful. They're going to live their lives and be happier. These people on the left who are terrified of the virus because what they're hearing in the media over and over again, they're not going out and working. They're demanding.
Being terrified of the virus because a local retirement home had 180 people get infected and had 60 people die. Also, hundreds of people in my rural community are now getting COVID-19, having to go to the ER. There are celebrities who we know get good health insurance and good coverage and good care. They are having to go into the ICU because COVID is really bad. 250,000 people dead so far. In how many months now? 11 in 8 months. That's a really big death toll, especially considering all the precautions we have taken. If we took no precautions, if people weren't freaking out about it, like Tim Pool is claiming, if they weren't freaking out, then by a year, which the pandemic really kicked off in March, by the time we got back around to March, there literally would be over 1 million COVID deaths, maybe 2 million. All the original projections were completely spot on. If we did nothing, that's how many deaths we would have got from COVID-19. This thing is serious, and, the hysteria in this instance is a good thing. People being scared is a good thing, because being too cautious is a lot better than letting your guard down and having a couple more thousand people die because you decided to be negligent.
Government, cut checks to them. I imagine they're not going to succeed, not going to improve their skills. In fact, sitting inside locked up all day is probably going to dull their abilities. I think it's going to create this weird disparity in skill cap and wealth at some point. But ultimately, I think it's just the media trying to make money. And they're going to chase after the horrifying narrative until they drive off the cliff.
And you're certainly seeing that with regard to the schools, where the only people who currently are going to schools are people either in red states or people who can afford to send their kids to private school. And if you are poor,
Not true. Many people are still going to school. Many kids are still going to school because even if you're a blue state, there's a good chance you have a Republican state legislature.
And living in Washington, D.C.,
Maybe
you
you're a
are
Republican
just screwed.
governor.
They're going to force you to put your kid on a Zoom school that your kid will not attend, and they will learn nothing. And apparently the media just don't care. So, Tim, I want to ask a few final questions.
The media just don't care.
You voted for Donald Trump. You're an independent, center-left guy. I want to ask why you voted for Donald Trump.
Independence. Okay, this is going to be a really fun part. There's 1 minute and 8 seconds left. Shapiro said Tim Pool is a center-left guy. Why did you vote for Donald Trump?
But if you'd like to hear Tim Pool's answers, you have to be a Daily Wire member. Go to Daily...
Never mind. Blue balled. All right. So, never going to find out. Could probably find that somewhere else. It's bullshit. We all know that. We all know the game. Yeah, this is full of lies, deception, hyperbolic claims of destruction caused by Antifa supercells that are planted all throughout the United States. Tim Pool is a genius. A very big genius. Oh boy. All right, I might watch the Vosh David Pakman thing tonight. I don't know yet. I'm going to go pick up some food right now, though. So if you guys, I have to reschedule that for tonight, actually. If you guys want to come back around for that, that'd be dope. That should be at, let me see. If someone like Vosh streams tonight, I'll probably just do this after he's done. But as of right now, I'm setting it for 10:30. And I won't fall asleep this time. I'm sorry for the people who were here last night waiting for me to show up, and I never did because because I slept too long. I took a nap, and I was going to wake up, but it didn't happen. Just did not happen. Yeah, Vosh Pakman. At what cost? Yeah, I fell asleep last night. I woke up at 12:30, I think. It was too late. I feel great right now. I feel elated. I feel like I'm so smart now as a result of hearing all of this great discussion. All right, yeah, the VOD will be up in the morning anyway if you wanted to check it out. You were still here. Well, thank you guys. Oh, yeah, remember, I'll put the Discord link in chat quick for anyone who's not in there. And if anyone's not subscribed, I'm sure all of you are subscribed because there's only 16 people here, but here is the Discord link. There you go. Hey Jay, I'll be back here tonight for the David Pakman Vosh thing at 10:30. I just put the link down there for Discord so people are on there if they want to be on there. Alright, that was fun. See y'all. The VOD will be up in a couple minutes if you didn't